to talk about binding your quilt, which of course is the last thing that we do, and we're always happy when we get there. And I know you all are all experienced, so I'm not going to bother going over how to join your strips.
Right over there.
Is this ours?
Yeah.
It's on, you want to turn it the other way?
Oh, it is on? Hello?
You just have to turn it over.
Oh.
There you go.
But I'm going to talk about bindings, and I was just saying that I think everybody here is an experienced quilter, so I'm not going to go into how to join them. But the reason we join them on an angle like this is to reduce the bulk. You can join them end to end if you're short on fabric or there's some other reason why you need to do that, but this reduces the bulk in your binding. And then to put it on the quilt, traditionally we sew it to the front and turn it to the back and then hand stitch on the back. At least Stacy does. She's not listening. And that's the typical way that you would finish binding. To go over how to do the corners, I'm going to have to lay this down.
We move the sign too.
Yeah. But once you've sewn it, you're started sewing it on. When you get to the corner, what I typically do is sew within 1/4 of an inch, fold the binding up
On an angle.
at a angle so that you've got a straight line right here, and then fold it directly down, and then start on this corner and stitch down, and then it makes a nice square corner. It is important that your piece is square and your corners are square to get your to get the corner of your binding square. So since most people know how to do that, I will move on to different kinds of bindings. This is our quilt, and it's all quilted and ready for binding. And one thing that I've been doing recently that I was taught by a teacher that I had, she washes her quilts when they're at this point. And this one is stitched around the edge, just very close, so that it will be inside your quilt binding. And she puts them in the washer and washes them and dries them before she puts the binding on. And I've done that a couple of times, and it does seem to make a nice binding. I know sometimes they look a little, I guess the word is crinkled, maybe?
Puckery?
Huh? Puckery, that's a good word. They look a little puckery otherwise. And I will say, this is a quilt that I actually did that way. And the quilt has been washed, and then I applied the binding.
So what was her reasoning? Is that the
It
quilt
makes-
shrinks and the binding shrinks at different?
Well, she said it makes a nicer binding.
Okay.
Do you agree?
The ones I've done, I agree. Now, I don't know, and I've just recently started doing that. I don't think I've got a quilt that I have since I put the binding on washed. But she tends to think that's the way to do it, so that's what I've been trying. One other thing about traditional bindings, you can, other than sew them down traditionally by hand on the back, I don't typically do this, but I did stitch this one from the front in the ditch right here, and you really can't see it, and it finished up pretty nicely on the back. Well, I missed a place right there, but other than that place, if you make sure that it covers your stitching line, you'll most always catch the binding. So that's a pretty quick way to finish it if you're kind of in a hurry. Now, this quilt, I'm going to show you how to do a facing. And in order to do a facing, you cut strips that are almost as long as your quilt. And I'll need to cut these off, but you want to cut them just a little bit shorter than the side of the quilt. And you want one for each side. And then what you do is you cut some squares, 4 squares, and you want them wide enough that they will cover your fabric after you fold it in half and get it on the quilt. I'll have to lay that down again, I'm sorry.
Just talk loud.
Okay.
This dang binding.
Well, this darn binding, I hate stitching it. But we're gonna cut these just a little bit shorter. I do have a pair of scissors here somewhere. And it doesn't have to be exact. Then what you want to do is fold it in half like a traditional binding. And you make one for each side of your quilt. So it's hard to hold that and do this too. But that's how it's going to look. And I made these, I think they were 2.5 inches wide. And it depends on the quilt. If you've got a bigger quilt, you can make it wider. And if you've got a small quilt, you can make it narrower. But after you fold your squares in half, what you want to do, and you're doing this from the front, you put your squares down in the corners. You'll press those. And you're folding them at an angle, like a half square triangle. You put one in each corner. And then you take your binding that you folded, and you're going to put it on top. And then you sew all the way around the quilt. And when you turn it, and I'll sew a corner so you can see what it looks like. This is plugged in. This is not my machine.
It's plugged in.
Here's what's on. But you sew it at 1/4 of an inch. This is a quiet machine.
Kathy, does it matter if your strip is, you're putting the strip on top of the little
Listen, it
corner
Put the
triangle?
square down first,
Put the square down first and then lay the strip on
and
that.
then you lay the strip on top. back in overdrive like I was. There we go. Anyway, y'all get the idea. Oh, I have told you.
Oh, I thought you did
You
it
did
that
the
way
other
corner,
to
correct?
show us.
Show
yeah.
us the other corner.
On the other corner.
I thought
Oh, I
you did
put
it
that
that
one
way
on
to,
top, okay.
to show them
Yeah,
what not to do.
well, that is
See,
what not
we
to
know
do.
what to do.
You did that on purpose to
Yes.
show
For
them.
teaching us.
No, I didn't. But then you turn it, and it's gonna be like that. Of course, you'll poke your corners out.
That, yeah.
Then you can hand stitch that down all the way, and I do have a quilt here.
Oh, neat.
This quilt is done that way, and that's how it looks on the front.
And that also gives you a hanging sleeve then. too.
Right, it
And it gives
does.
you
And then
corners
this
to
is
hang
the
it.
back. And I didn't, you can sew these down. I've got another quilt here where I sewed them down. This one. And I typically try to match the backing. I have done, the first time I did this, it was because I ran out of fabric to bind it with. So I just put a facing on it. But this one converts really to a hanging sleeve for this rod. And I did add a
Just add a
loop
little
there.
loop there, yeah.
Yeah.
Works.
So evidently I ran out of that fabric too. Oh, no, I didn't. I did that because of it's different on two sides.
Yeah. So you did the top and the bottom ones, you did half and half of that, the two
Yeah.
fabrics there.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
So I matched that one to the front. But it usually works out to match it.
Does it work better as a wall hanging treatment, or can you use it as a blanket as well, like a throw or something?
Well, this one is a throw,
Okay.
and it worked out just fine. And it depends on the look. I think it looks good on a modern quilt.
Talk
or
louder.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Pretty pretty.
So that's a facing. And I like that treatment. I like the way it looks, and because it's simple and it's, you know,
It's much cleaner.
kind of
than some
uncluttered.
others.
Yeah,
Yes,
uncluttered
yes,
was
yes,
the word I was looking for. And it takes a little bit of effort to poke these corners out, but because you've got batting and everything, but they can be done.
That'd be good for table runners or
If you
or, know,
cut
that kind of
across
stuff too,
that-
you know, yeah.
Clip across that corner
Yeah.
before you turn it,
Yeah.
it'd turn easier probably.
Clip it.
Yeah, if you clip it and work with it.
Yeah.
Trim out, sometimes I
the
trim
corners,
out
yeah.
the batting that's
Mhm.
right here,
Yeah.
so it'll usually turn. And then the last binding that I want to show is, I guess some people call it two-color or a flange binding. And in order to make a flange, you need two different colors. One is your accent color, and you want it to have quite a bit of contrast. If it doesn't have a lot of contrast, it's not gonna show, and then it's not really worth the effort. But it's just a decorative edge, and I think it can add to some quilts. I think I have a quilt here that's got one. Yeah, this one has two, a larger one and then a small one in the binding. But this is put in there pretty much the same way. You just make a little skinny piece of fabric.
Almost like a little peeking.
Yeah. The only thing to remember is if you're quilting this in an all over, I quilted this in the ditch. You've got to stop and
Make sure it's
you
flat,
probably
yeah.
know.
Yep.
Yeah.
Be careful.
What recommendations do you have for that?
Just pay attention.
Pay attention. Because the first quilt I did with one of these, I was quilting it all over and I realized I was gonna sew this down. So you've got to stop and start again. That's the only drawback.
So could you put cording in that?
You could, it wouldn't have to be fabric, it could be cording or it could be,
Well, I was thinking you've got the fabric, but you could put cord inside that.
yeah, like pipe, like
Piping.
Yeah.
pillow piping,
Yeah.
what do they call that? A
around a pillow. Yeah, that would look really good. In fact,
Did we see one just
we
yesterday?
just saw one at a quilt shop.
Yes.
Yes, that's, yeah, same principle.
Trent.
Yeah. In fact, it really looked good. It was very showy. I thought it really added to the quilt.
Has anybody ever seen or done a gathered binding?
I have seen them, like a gather in here.
It's like it's ruched up.
Gathered I don't know
fringe.
how you do it other than just make a gather and put it in there.
Okay. It's like the binding is,
The binding or the flange?
the binding is
Okay.
ruched up.
Oh, I haven't seen the binding
Yeah.
that way.
I've seen the
I've seen like a
flange.
flange
Yeah.
that way.
No, Kim Ball, when we took her class, she had a quilt on there that had a gathered binding that I was, had never seen before and haven't seen it since.
Huh.
Wouldn't you have to do that, do the gathering first and then put it
It
on?
seems like it, but it seems like it'd be hard when you folded it over. You know, I don't know how it's done, that's why I asked.
I would think you would have to have something inside to sew that to. Maybe another binding of sorts. And then sew the gathered part on top maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know, I've never, I've done a search for it, I didn't just, spend a lot of time on it, but I just wondered if anybody had done one.
But to make these, you have two pieces, and I've got the dimensions written down. Some people like a 2.5 inch binding, some like a 2 1/4, or even a 2 inch. And depending on which one you're doing, how large you cut each piece is different. But the actual accent is your larger piece. And the binding, what you would call the binding, is the smaller piece. And this one is, I think, 1 5/8 and 1 1/4. So when you fold it over, then you've got the part that's on the back showing. See, the back is this.
So that gives you what you see. The longer that is, the wider that would be.
Right, and if you want it wider, you can make it a little wider. I think I don't know if I have it here, but I've done quilts where it's a little bit wider. Just depends on how much you want it to show.
These two are different sizes as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. So then when you sew it on, you just sew it on the traditional way, and you make the corners the same way. You sew it on and just turn it. And then to finish it off, you sew right in the ditch where the two colors meet.
Except you'd have it the other way around with that part on the front.
Yeah. That's something. Yeah. And you make the corners the same way. Fold them up, fold them over. And when you turn it, you do it the same way and just try to match up where the two colors meet. And when you stitch it, it's gonna, because this is so short, it's gonna be on the back end of the fabric. So you might wanna match your thread on the back to that color of the fabric. So those are just 3 types of bindings. There's lots of other types. You can do a self-binding with a narrow binding or even a wide binding. That looks really neat on some quilts. You can not even have a binding. You can do sew all the way around and turn it and flip it. And, just, it'll look similar to this, but it'll be all one piece. You don't have to sew down on the back. I do have a couple of handouts with some resources on them and the flange measurements if anybody's interested in those. Good job. All right. Any questions?